an assemblage of new, previously unseen extraterrestrial technologies, even within the universe of our intellectual property, an inversion drive that literally pulls you like a black hole into nothingness, only to blow you back out fully assembled, back in your universe, and literally an astronomical distance from your starting point, a new type of technology based on creative physics, until something goes horribly wrong and the whole cosmos and the whole of reality, even not as we know it beyond our perception, begins to break down. It can be rebuilt, but it's going to take teamwork, working together as a crew, and a heck of an assemblage of musical instruments and a band like you've never heard play before. True story. This is the Star Trek literary universe. Diane Duane, 1983, The Wounded Sky. When you are building a literary universe to an already existing intellectual property or franchise that from television or from movies, there's a couple of different ways to approach it. One is to expand on the legacy characters, focus on them, people we've already learned to know and love from the show that we know and love, otherwise we wouldn't be reading the book, giving them new adventures along the way and maybe learning more about them and their background than screen time allows time for. Also, minor characters who have appeared on screen, background characters, people that maybe were on for a while and left, being able to focus on them within the literary property and give them more of a backstory, more of an expanded role, follow their adventures. The third way is building out, which is completely new characters that are unique to your non-canon canon, your literary universe's canon of this property, new species, new adventures, new places, new locales, or whatever it is. And different authors will approach this differently, but of course, the good ones, they all do some of all of this. It just depends on which one is primarily their focus. The New Frontiers, Star Trek novels, Captain Mackenzie Calhoun, new character, but around him, we have a plethora of people that we know. Dr. Pulaski, Commander Shelby, Dr. Solar. The novels about Captain Sulu expand on his crew and bring in Admiral Jellicoe, now an admiral, he'd been a captain, Admiral Nechayev, etc. Bringing in the legacy characters and the minor characters. The Star Trek literary universe is so broad, I'm sure if you want to read a whole novel of the adventures of Ensign Robin Leffler, who was played by Ashley Judd on Star Trek The Next Generation, I bet you somebody out there has written it, or a book where she's a major character, or even if it's fan fiction, you can find it. And across the different franchises, Star Wars novels have done this. Even V, which was huge at its time, but very limited, the V novels were quite popular at one time. The visitors are our friends, because friendship is universal. Now, as a Star Trek nerd, when I discovered reading books, I had originally read comic books as a kid. People thought that was weird at the time. I was on the cusp of nerdy becoming cool. It didn't become cool for me until I was an old man, and now it's like, what happened? But comic books were what got me to read and really learn how to read well. And Star Trek was a huge part of that, being a Star Trek fan. My parents were before I was born. And so reading the comics when I could get a hold of them was like, this is a way to get more Star Trek before the movies were even a thing. This was a way to get more Trek. And then when I was reading adult books for young adults or adults, then I find this huge plethora of Star Trek novels out there in the world. My favorite has to be Diane Duane, and that's why I wanted to talk a little bit. I just recently bought in Kindle and reread that book from 1983 that I had read sometime in the late 80s originally, The Wounded Sky. And Diane Duane is one of those that has all the legacy characters, and the key thing is she understands the legacy characters. I could say a lot about the fake Star Treks out now that don't understand the basic nature of Star Trek, much less anything of the characters as they've brought them back. that gives me a headache. Diane Duane really understood Kirk, Spock, McCoy, Scotty, how their dynamic worked. The three, Kirk, Spock, McCoy, the lower ranks, Chekhov, Sulu, Uhura. Scotty kind of floated in the middle between these two worlds. He wasn't quite as close with the top three. But people have written whole books about how this dynamic worked. Diane Duane really understood the dynamic, the relationship, and how they interacted. And then in the midst of that, she really builds out. We get all of the things that Star Trek can fire your imagination to imagine, but they already didn't have the special effects to put on screen, didn't have the screen time to put on screen. She comes up with things that you could probably do now quite expensively through a lot of CGI. But when you have characters like K'Tilk, the engineer, who is an arachnoid, like spider-like, made of pieces and bits of crystal and glass-like structure. I mean, she chimes to make noise, and it's how she speaks. This is incredible stuff, but that's just the beginning. Diane Duane gets the core characters and the core vision of Star Trek, and particularly in The Wounded Sky, when she focuses on the recreational area, the psychology of the crew, the interaction of all these divergent alien species and how they come together as one, and music being a huge component of that. There's something that is fascinatingly church-like in the spirituality of how she brings them together in a shared space with shared music, with the overlap of all of these voices. She turns the Enterprise crew into this type of choir. And because, again, we're in a literary universe, the sky's the limit on what you can imagine, because you don't have to figure out how to put it on screen in 1983. And so we get the beautiful inversion drive. It literally, like sucking the universe through a straw, it pulls you into this other non-place and poofs you back out again like this balloon. I have to say, does it make any sense by the laws of physics? And the answer is yes. As she defines it within the story, it is creative physics, using your imagination and willing it, the will of the viewer to affect the material. And even Scotty within the book says, Lass, that's magic you're talking about. This is not science, it's magic. But why not? Based on all the things we learned about physics before her time and since, you must say that Diane Duane is sort of onto something of the cosmos as a projection. Can it respond to will? Can it respond to will in certain circumstances? But what is nothingness? And in a way, it ends up being a very religious novel without being religious. And I don't want to say spiritual, because that has a whole lot of other weird connotations, particularly today, that wouldn't fit. But there's a lot of sort of mysticism to it. What is this place of non-existence? Every time they get pulled into this state of non-existence, they actually become more connected one with another. They actually have experiences in the non-existence, living as other members of the crew or at other times and places as other entities, and come back with this loss of identity or a loss of privacy, of the feeling that they've all been deeply and intimately connected in some way and been through something. And we discover that what they have done in using the inversion drive has affected the entire cosmos. Knowing they could go excessive distances, the plan was to leave our galaxy, skip the whole galactic barrier thing that is part of Trek lore, pop out of our reality and pop back in the Lesser Magellanic Cloud, a whole other mini galaxy near ours. And in arriving, discovering that each time they're using this inversion drive, they're having crazier and more profound, real-seeming experiences, and they're causing damage to the fabric of the cosmos itself. Spilling in from a non-existence realm is something that prevents entropy. It is a perpetual now, a perpetual eternity. Time doesn't move. It's a substance of timelessness spilling in that will ultimately destroy everything that exists in our universe, such as we can call it ours, because basic biological processes Your heart cannot beat when time does not pass. Spock anticipates that everything in the cosmos will die because of this, but it will not die. It will die without dying. It will be trapped perpetually in this lingering instant of not being able to live, but not being able to die. Ultimately, using creative physics, using the drive, the crew figures out, with the help of K'Tilk and her chiming away her brilliant hypotheses, how they can use the inversion drive to fix the universe. They shatter it completely, and they all arrive in what is essentially this weird, empty wasteland where they get the band back together, and through the performance of music in their will, in their mind, in their consciousness, from their soul, the band assembles with all the alien instruments and all the alien voices, and they begin to delicately weave, and K'Tilk is able to weave back together the entire fabric of the cosmos as it was and seal it up and save the day. Now, at the end, it ends up being a very non-Star Trek type of story. Oh, I mean, they have seen Strange New Worlds, and they certainly, this is off the end of the spectrum of places to go where no one has gone before, of things to do that like we never saw on screen. But that's what ultimately it makes it so different than anything that you would have attempted to put on screen. It's hard to define how out there it seems, and yet, again, because Diane Duane understands Trek, everything about this feels Star Trek, even in the midst of the weird story, because all of those characters are there, the way they talk to one another, the way they interact, the way they feel about each other, what the Federation stands for, what Starfleet means, what all these different aliens, having found, as she always puts it in her novels, the Diane Duane verse, the humanities of our part of the galaxy. Long before the TNG episode, The Chase, there were all these hypotheses about why all the creatures, so many of them anyway, look humanoid. She goes that step further. They're all connected in some way. This is the humanity, the humans, the humanity of our part of the Milky Way that might span the galaxy, but it is a united humanity despite what planet you came from. In her Trek, being from Vulcan, being from Andor, being from her planet is no different than in our time being from one island or another island or a different island. They are all the same. The people there are people. They are all humanities. The unity of the Federation, going out to explore. And she captures that flavor so well that she can stick them in a completely, otherwise, it's hard to define because I can only define it by things that were written after, which shows how prescient it was. But she can slap it into this matrixy, 13th floor-y, the nature of reality sort of story. And you still feel like these are the people of Star Trek, the series, the Star Trek, the motion picture. You feel that this really is Star Trek, and they're going through this. And again, this is something lost in our time. People that are dealing with Kurtzman, Trek, do all this other stuff, even those that seem to get it a little bit, overall, the approach to the characters, everything just feels wrong. Conversely, and I'm looking forward to season 3, the Orville. I've never been a fan of Seth MacFarlane personally. I never was a Family Guy guy. Like, what in the world is it? But the Orville's great because even though I don't like him in so many other ways, Seth MacFarlane understands Star Trek. And he's giving us his version of it, and it's more Star Trek than the people that own the actual label. But Diane Duane had that insight as well. The stuff that she does, right up there with Roddenberry's stuff, really, right up there with DC Fontana and the others that understand the core spirit of Star Trek, both in principle and ideal, and the feel of it, the sort of the mojo and the character interaction and passion between them, and you end up with these incredible novels. But it was the first one of hers I ever read, so I wanted to reread it because I just got done with a whole bunch of Philip K. Dick and other novels over the last year, and I thought, I want to read something fun. But it does end up still being every bit as deep as anything Phil Dickian. The nature of reality, how we summon our reality into existence by our will and by our focus, by our own imagination. What is the nature of reality? It's just as timely now. It was so far in advance of what most of us were contemplating in 1983, that it is still prescient to this day. Check it out. Let me know what you think. Diane Duane, The Wounded Sky. Peace and long life.